Tell me about that's what I or even live stream. We want to do more. It's hybrid. We're trying to figure out the hybrid, right? Everything we have to have a logical solution. Okay.
Yeah, that's
So, okay. Because initially we thought we'll all be on okay. That's not, but you have just trying to figure out because this is a learning process.
He's just taking out battery shot here.
Sure, perfect. Oh, that's perfect.
Oh, we missed the
You wanted to
No. We don't have it. Okay. What you will information. Anybody who was dependent on, not dependent, but was looking forward to that. Wow. I don't. So but I'm not. You are everywhere. I saw it. Because at the end of the day, the reason for coming here. Happy man. Doing good. See you. Oh, wonderful. That's amazing. You should sit on the table. We're in the same bubble.
We're in the same bubble. You guys talk.
Wonderful. You're working. Yeah, set it up. Oh, thank you. I'll give you. Thank you. That's great. Good. All right. Thank you. I'd love to. Okay. Thank you. Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Please, welcome. This is great to see you. First hybrid event after a long break. I'm glad to see you. I'm here again.
Students.
We met long ago when you came to accept a piece of closed concession.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Very nice to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Great. And I think you're going to also have it on Facebook. Oh, it's Facebook Live, and then there's people on the webinar. Right? Zoom webinar. Okay, that's good. We have a 30 people restriction here. Yeah, and then we only restricted it to Carmen. Right? Yeah, okay, thank you.
A year or little over a year ago, I think Vijay Arun, the past president, and myself, we did a session with Ro on the CARES Act. If you remember, it was very well received, lots of good questions, and thanks for spending the time with us again. And I think today it's very important for all of us in the technology industry to know about this bill, which is to talk about how the technology investments in our country can improve and differentiate us compared to the rest of the world. So we'll talk more about that. Yogi, please make an introduction and take it from there.
Well, Ajike, thank you for all of you here today in person. We appreciate you being here today on TIE's first hybrid event after COVID. But it's simply my privilege, my pleasure to introduce somebody that I think needs very little introduction, but certainly Congressman Khanna represents the Congressional District 17, which is Fremont, Newark, Milpitas, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Silicon Valley. The essence of what Silicon Valley is all about. Third term in office, and during this time, he's trailblazed to really be a thoughtful leader, a thinker, who really looks at America's position in the world and represents our district, obviously, with a certain amount of distinction coming to the district as often as he can. He serves on the Armed Services Committee, the Agriculture Committee, the Oversight Committee, where he heads the subcommittee on the environment. Certainly, and the New Frontiers Bill is something that I think you're going to be very pleased to hear about. A tremendous amount of insight that's going to be provided about the trailblazing nature of this bill. Congressman Khanna, welcome to the TIE ecosystem.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Yogi, for the kind introduction, for your friendship for many, many years, and your vision in pushing for innovation and entrepreneurship and your idea to conceive of this forum. So, of course, you're a really close friend, but also a great leader, and appreciate the invite. And AGK, thank you for your leadership of TIE at a very critical moment and through the pandemic, tough times. And I know you were in touch on what we could be doing for our startup community, Valley. Appreciated your leadership then. Great to be here for the first hybrid event. So thank you everyone for joining us.
So I think, as a start, right, maybe you should tell us a little bit about the bill itself and how it was conceived, and then we have a bunch of questions that
Sure.
make it interactive. That's the flow of the event. Is that right way to start? Yogi, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, AGK, this is a bill that Senator Schumer and I have been working on for 3 years, a bipartisan bill, Endless Frontiers, with Senator Todd Young in Indiana and Representative Mike Gallagher over in Wisconsin. It passed the Senate 68-32. McConnell voted for it. That's how bipartisan it was. And it's poised to pass the House of Representatives. When it does, it will mark the largest increase in science and technology investment since the 1960s in our country. Investment of over $100 billion over 5 years in critical industries of the future, in synthetic biology, alternative proteins, electronic manufacturing, semiconductors, quantum computing, AI, clean technology, creating technology hubs across America. So not just at Stanford and MIT, but across America. And of course, it's America spends about 0.7% of our GDP on research and development. At the height of the Cold War, it was 2%. China is at 1.3%. So we need to make a fundamental investment. It was the federal research and development that, of course, everyone knows in the Valley that led to the creation of the internet. The IP protocols and the TCP protocols that Vint Cerf came up with was during the time that he was at DARPA, funded by DARPA. And that really led to the creation of both the IP address and the TCP transmission that allowed for data packets to go from one computer to the other because of the use that would happen. If it weren't for Vint Cerf, if it weren't for the federal funding of that, we never would have had the internet. So we have seen the importance of research and science technology. Of course, people in the Valley should appreciate it more than anyone, and that this bill will make that bad.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that good overview.
That's right. We have a series of questions, and these questions are designed to help our audience listen to various aspects of this trailblazing bill, as many have defined this as it is vital for America's position in the world. But if you can talk a little bit about how, really, from your perspective, this strengthens entrepreneurship in the U.S. As you know, the TIE ecosystem thrives on the world of entrepreneurship. And this very idea of innovation, research and development, and improving our supply chain capabilities Can you shed a little bit of light on how that addresses that?
Sure. Well, one of the aspects of this bill is to create a tech directorate at the National Science Foundation. Punch, who's there, I can't go into the full name, but he's a great leader, Indian American, who was at Arizona State University and committed to applied science. This is actually a belief in funding not just theoretical science, but applied science. My view, what I've told folks who pushed back and said, oh, you should just do theoretical science, is I said, to make advances in theoretical science, you need applied science. The theoretical scientist, when he comes up with a theorem, when he comes up with an idea, has to see how that works in practice to then revise that theorem to perfect that theory. And I sort of sometimes sarcastically say, well, okay, maybe that doesn't apply if you're Albert Einstein, but if you're Albert Einstein, you also don't need an NSF grant. You're going to be brilliant. Most mortals who, even people who win the Nobel Prize, they need applied science to understand the theoretical science. And that's why the president of MIT, president of Caltech have supported the bill. So the biggest thing it does for entrepreneurship is it says, we believe that the private sector and entrepreneurs have a critical role to play in the advancement of science, that we have to have collaboration from the outset between our academic institutions, between our private entrepreneurs, and between the significant leaders of industry and government to create the scientific breakthroughs that we need.
Thank you.
And on that front, right, Valley, if you really take a look at it, is the hotbed for the semiconductor industry, AI, quantum computing, and manufacturing. How does it assist these particular segments, which are, many of the Thai entrepreneurs, charter members have got businesses in these areas. And of course, a lot of us, I for one, got a lot of my entrepreneurial journey from the semiconductor industry, and there's a talk about big revival of semiconductor industry, considering the amount of investment going in and also trying to create a gap between the rest of the world and America.
Well, the semiconductor industry would have a significant funding, almost $50 billion, to be able to create hubs and fabs in the United States. Right now, the leading semiconductor manufacturer is in Taiwan, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and they are a leading in terms of non-proprietary manufacturing, because Intel, of course, is proprietary. They'll only manufacture their own chips. But when it comes to having a manufacturer of general chips, it's all being done in Taiwan. And so they're coming to Arizona, and this funding would actually help make that possible, so that doesn't just become a prototype or a small manufacturing facility, but actually becomes a broader manufacturing facility. It will help other semiconductors manufacturers to set up manufacturing plants here to make sure that their manufacturing is done in the United States, so we're not dependent on critical chips from Taiwan or from Korea or another part of the world. That we need to have that critical capacity here. And the CHIPS funding is all about providing funding for semiconductors to set up their manufacturing.
Is it predominantly only in the manufacturing, or also front end all the way from the design on?
All the way in the design and manufacturing, but a significant focus on making sure that the manufacturing is here, that we're not splitting and just doing the design. Some of the design we still are leading. In design, as you know, and Taiwan hasn't even caught up on some of the most advanced design, but that's of little or not sufficient value if we're not also manufacturing it here. So it is a integrated focus on design and manufacturing, but a real focus on making sure that those chips can be manufactured in the United States.
Oh, wonderful. On the AI front and also quantum computing, any comments?
So the AI front, it's going to fundamentally fund research. One of the things that China has a big advantage is on big data. But as a professor at MIT explained to me, I have kids. So when a child learns a new word, they don't have thousands of input. You don't have to see thousands of pictures of a fish to learn the word fish. The human brain is far more complex. And the leading edge research on AI is to try to model the human brain and how we actually comprehend the world instead of just thinking we're going to put tons of data into something and discern a pattern. That kind of AI research would be transformative. As one of the professors at MIT told me, he's trying to engineer Immanuel Kant being the famous philosopher who came up with time, space, and the categories of human perception. So the bill will fundamentally fund research in AI that is transformative. That isn't happening right now in the private sector. Private sector funding on AI outstrips China 8-1 in the United States. But that funding isn't going into the most transformative aspects of AI, and that's what we would be funding in this bill. And then on quantum computing, it will be funding both the technology on quantum computing, and then thinking about how do we have cybersecurity, because if quantum computing can break through encryption or break through security, we're going to have to also think about how do we have security in an age of quantum computing.
That's great.
Okay.
Congressman, a lot of times the investment by the government is complemented by private investments, and specifically the Thai ecosystem in Silicon Valley thrives in the world of venture capitalism. This is a long haul bill. It's not immediate, 1 year, 2 years, so protracted period of time. What input, what thoughts would you give to the venture community? How can they complement and support the basic intent of the new frontier bill?
Well, the bill, I think Endless Frontiers will lay out the critical areas of technology that will be funded, so that will be finalized in the other areas. And of course, venture capitalists will know more than I do what has market promise, but I would say that places that were focused as critical needs for the country would probably be places that would benefit from collaboration with the private sector and with the government. And I would say that I would never give someone investment advice, and that's not my place. But what I will say is that we have to look to have collaboration in critical industries.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that front, right, I mean, there's a lot of collaboration that happens between industry and the academics, right? There's a different type of funding like SBIR, STTR, and R01 grants and all that kind of stuff. Is the mode is going to be similar to what has been historically done? How NSF and other DARPA and all of them fund this, or is it changing in terms of how this money is going to be deployed to these channels?
Well, I think it's going to be a similar deployed channel, but with a tech directorate, which is going to focus on what is the collaboration. When you're applying for this grant, what are you doing to collaborate with the private sector? What are you doing in terms of job creation? What is your plan for commercialization? So the criteria is going to be with a greater lens of the applied aspect of the technologies. But the process, a lot of the disbursement will still be through the NSF, which has gotten the biggest plus up, or the labs, or the DOE. That is still going to be the same process with a greater focus on applied.
Right. You mentioned quite a bit about MIT and some of the professors who've been part of the framework of the early conversations. Can you elaborate a little bit about the very notion of academic versus industry collaboration? And if you can further augment this a little bit about, obviously we look at things through a Silicon Valley cluster, but the rural versus the urban technology clusters beyond Silicon Valley. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, one of the exciting things about this bill is it's going to create technology hubs across the country. The market cap, can anyone guess what the market cap of Bay Area companies are? Any guess?
10 trillion.
Oh, very good. 11 trillion.
I was going to say,
Google and Microsoft.
$11 trillion. $11 trillion. Unprecedented in economic history. And yet towns under 50,000 have had wealth stagnation since 2008, stagnant wages. The racial wealth gap has actually increased in this country since the end of Jim Crow. Think about that. Since Dr. King and the end of the formalized segregation, racial wealth gap has increased in American society. So you have a large parts of the country left out of the digitization of the economy. 25 million digital jobs by 2025, more than manufacturing and construction combined. And yet those jobs are highly concentrated in places like the Bay Area, Austin, Boston, Seattle, New York. We have to change that as a society, as a country, if we want to have people participate in the economic wealth generation of the future. This bill does that by saying that not all the money can go just to MIT and Stanford. It has to create technology hubs across the country in creating those opportunities for wealth generation.
so what kind of guidelines are there? I mean, when you create these clusters, is it NSF that's giving the guideline, or is it the directorate, or is it elected, congressmen who go and ask for money? How does it work?
No, it's really not Congress. That would be, you'd just be giving it to too much patronage. So it is the Department of Commerce that would have guidelines with the Secretary of Commerce, and you would have a community applying. Think of the Amazon process, but think of it not with competing with public subsidies, but competing to show that you have an innovative community that's going to be able to get a grant. So you'd have to get the private sector, you'd have to get the universities, the community college system, the school districts, all to submit this application. And then there would be an independent panel at Commerce that say, this is a community that really would thrive for a innovation, a tech grant. And it may not be in software, it may be in regenerative agriculture, it may be in some advanced form of manufacturing, maybe in robotics, but your community would show that need, and then the Department of Commerce will make that decision.
Okay.
Which brings to the next point, certainly the investments in education from a skilling standpoint. How does this bill address the very idea of educating the workforce of the future, specific to some of the things that we certainly have lacked in America in regards to education and retooling the workforce of the future?
Well, its focus is on credentialing, so that we need to not just have people learn academic skills, but what are the actual skills that are going to get them employed, and the credential that's going to get employed. So it's collaborative with the private sector and community colleges and universities to say, okay, what is the one-year training program that's actually going to get someone an employable skill and where the market needs. And it's also working with the school districts to get that kind of a collaborative education, because a lot of times you hear that people take these courses and then they end up frustrated because they're not able to be employable. They don't know how to some of the basic commercial technology or applications. They don't know, for example, I mean, training someone in Amazon cloud or in Google Cloud or in understanding that is probably a very effective way to get a job, or in robotics process automation. So working with the private sector, what are the skills that are going to lead to job creation, and how do we get those people with those skills?
Yeah, I mean, along the same line, right? The skilling, the universities play a major role. And as you know, American universities attract a lot of students worldwide, right? And when they come here, they go through, the education. It could be a combination of research and just classes they go to in a classroom setting. But end of the day, when they come out, they need to get a practical on-the-job training, right? So there are the things like campus practical training, CPT, OPT, and then of course, subsequently H-1B and all that stuff. There's a multiple ways of, getting them into the market, these students who come from abroad. Is that going to change? Or I don't know how this connects with the, what I call employability of these international students, which, many of our community, many of them come here to study and then they create large companies. So is it changing?
Well, that's an immigration question. I certainly think people who are coming here and creating jobs and have that expertise should have a way of getting a green card and citizenship. But this bill doesn't deal with the immigration issues. I mean, that's a huge separate issue. The bill is focused sort of on developing American technology and innovation and training in the workforce here. Of course, I do think that we need an immigration policy that says if you've gotten educated in an American university and have a degree, an advanced degree, and you're working here, we'd rather have you stay here than go back to the country to create jobs outside America. So we want to incentivize that. We want to make sure there's no market leverage. So some of these companies that have abused the process by undercutting wages, they haven't been, Apple pays someone $120,000, but some of them pay $60,000. That needs to be stopped, and that needs to be reformed. But as long as they're paying market wages and not undercutting the market, then we have to provide a way for them to be creating jobs in the United States.
Yeah, but these are various departments coming together, right? I know you talked about it's an immigration question, but the challenge that the industry faces many of the times is that, hey, I can't give an opportunity to somebody who researched on a, let's say 2 nanometer semiconductor process, and NSF funded professor got that research done. unfortunately, that person is not employable and packs the bag and goes to some other parts of the world, right? And is there a way to connect these, or it's, but that's where the government has to come together, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, I think we need immigration reform, but I think that the immigration reform is such a complicated issue that deals with the border, what's happening there, that deals with what's happening with undocumented agricultural workers, hospitality workers. So the government in solving that issue or addressing that issue can't just look at one industry and say, okay, here's what we need on technology without looking at it more comprehensively, given all of the constituencies involved. And I do think President Biden will have a comprehensive immigration plan. But right now, this plan is sort of about how do we invest in our innovative development. So we may think, well, how do we make sure that we have more PhDs and more advanced researchers in the United States cultivating our talent and our workforce?
Congressman, thank you so much for that. One of the key constituencies of the TIE ecosystem is entrepreneurs and founders of companies. And often enough, we take pride in the fact that they solve problems that others don't see, and that's the long haul, and that's where they're able to build companies of value. On this bill specifically, if there were an entrepreneur who'd be looking at this bill and understanding where the spirit of this law is to help America regain its supremacy in the world across a multiple amount of gamuts, what advice would you be giving to those entrepreneurs?
Again, I don't want to give any business advice. I can't give any advice about investing or what to do for business. I can only talk about what I think is in the country's interest. But I would say that what as a country we need to do is focus on the fundamental infrastructure of technology. We need to make sure that we have 5G and we can compete on 5G. We need to make sure that we are leading in AI. We need to make sure that we're leading in clean technology and in looking in new places like fusion and the possibility of fusion, looking at solar and wind and massive investments in that, looking at creating an electric vehicle charging grids and financing and transitioning to electric vehicles. We need to think about where synthetic biology is headed and be leading in synthetic biology, both because of the environmental impact and also the possibilities of production. So my focus would be how do we increase the productive capacity and look for breakthrough technologies in the country. And the government has to support the discontinuous innovation, the innovation that's transformative, that the private sector often doesn't have the long horizon patience or ability to do because of the demands of quarterly earnings and stakeholders, shareholders.
And again, on these type of forward-looking research, right? There are TRLs, 0 to 3, 4 to 7, 7 to 10. Some of them are forward-looking, right? So where do you think the money will be spent in that spread? Is it going to be even, or is it going to be way forward-looking? Because you talked about R&D investments, right? People are looking at, hey, what will I get in the next 1 year versus 5 years versus 10 years? So how do we?
Well, that's a place where, fortunately, Congress people aren't going to be making the decisions. I don't think you want members of Congress deciding how the money should be spent in that level of specificity. You want the experts and academics and industry leaders. So that would be a decision that Punch at the NSF or that DOE's had or the labs would have. And Congress is just saying, we want this continuous innovation. We want to in these broad areas, but the specificity of it is not something you want from members of Congress because they're barely enough members of Congress who understand technology. If we were to start to prescribe that, I don't think that would be healthy for the country.
Okay. Yeah, for the audience, we just wanted to make sure that have your questions. We have somebody who will read out the questions and we'll address it also. One other question along the same line is that, the technology clusters, the Silicon Valley and also around the country, right? We talked about it earlier, but specifically, how will the technology clusters benefit or, this bill is going to help that community?
How will it benefit the technology clusters?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a direct grants that the Commerce Department could provide $2-3 billion up to grants to communities. Let's say I'm just picking something at random. Let's say you're St. Louis, Missouri, and you say, I want to create a technology cluster, and you have the capacity. Well, let's pick Akron because Akron had tire manufacturing, and you did something that built on the skills of tires, but in an advanced manufacturing or robotics or something that built on that skill set, and you said, I want to create that technology hub, you would apply to the Department of Commerce and you would have, we need money to do this training. Labs, we need this money to hire faculty, we need this money to have venture capital funding, we need this money to support local entrepreneurs, and the Department of Commerce will literally write a grant check, which then would be administered. Now, I think the venture capital should be administered not by the government, but by local venture capitalists probably in that area who aren't conflicted. And we have to figure out how do we make sure that there's collaboration again with government, private sector, and the academy. And this is not some naive hope that you can create Silicon Valley everywhere. You probably can't, and efforts that have done that have failed. So no one is saying go create $2 trillion market caps in companies. But what we're saying is that every place may have their own innovative possibilities, and that you can create more innovation clusters. It could be around timber processing. It could be around agriculture. It could be around manufacturing. Technology is digitizing every industry and having transformative effects. And this is seeking to look at how do we create, tailored to the community, the possibility of more innovation within a community.
That's great. And one of the press clippings on this issue, I talked a little about how the bill strengthens our position against China's domination in the world. How do you speak to that? Because that's a question many people ask. How will this impact companies who are going to be operating in China?
Well, first of all, I would bet on the United States system as an immigrant nation, as a free enterprise nation, as a democracy over China any day. I'm not underestimating it, but I say the day I will get concerned about China, deeply concerned, is when we start to see everyone in the world wanting to go to China. Right now, that's not happening. They still want to come to the United States. And the reason they want to come to the United States is this is still a great place to live. It's a place where you can to have enormous freedom and enormous innovation potential, enormous creativity, enormous ability to live your own values, your own traditions, your own culture. Now, what we need to do, though, is make sure that the bedrock is strong, that we can't have an authoritarian country simply spend orders of magnitude more in critical areas like 5G, like AI, like synthetic biology, and start developing leads in that and then exporting that through a form, in my view, of almost neo-colonialism, where they're going into these other countries and telling them that, okay, we're going to give you the technology, and making them dependent on those technologies. And those technologies don't have privacy. They don't have the same freedoms. And so we don't want those to become the standards for the world. And we also don't want another nation to lead in those areas. And to make sure we don't give them that lead, we want to be investing here in the United States. I don't believe we need to have another Cold War with China, but I believe America should win. I think America should lead. And the way to do that is by investing in our critical innovation. If we make those investments combined with our universities, 18 of the top 20 universities in the world in the United States, combined with our system of free enterprise, combined with our entrepreneurship, I have no doubt that America will lead the 21st century.
Well, that's the last question that we now come down to, but really coming back to this very notion, if you had to come back and summarize your thoughts about how this helps us lead towards the question of competitive advantage in the world, how would you summarize that?
Well, it helps us, I mean, think about what we did. We created the internet for the world, and that was through a federal investment. It was literally through DARPA. We created GPS, we've created so many of the transformative technologies. There's no reason to think that we wouldn't be able to do that in numerous other fields, especially now when we've got more diversity than ever before, more talent from around the world than ever before. We can be on the cutting edge of driving the fundamental innovation for the 21st century. I do believe that the nation that leads technologically in the 21st century is a nation that will lead the 21st century. I don't think winning the 21st century is simply about building new traditional military power. Of course, you have to have a strong enough defense to be safe and to make sure no one invades Taiwan and no one is taking over islands. Of course, you need to have deterrence, but that's just putting ICBMs in encircling China is not going to win the 21st century. Leading in AI, leading in clean technology, leading in quantum computing, that's what's going to win the 21st century.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, we have some questions from the audience, I think. Could you?
We have about 3 questions so far, Ro. The first question is from Prakash Naran, who is chair of our Entrepreneurship program for many years at TACOM. He's asking, are there tax incentives in the bill for retaining manufacturing in the U.S.?
They're not in this bill, but there are in the infrastructure bill that we will be hopefully passing with President Biden. And that is tax incentives designed towards manufacturing in the United States. Of course, the chips part of this, the semiconductor, there are direct grants and direct loans to manufacture in the United States. But in terms of broader tax incentives, that's something that will be part of the infrastructure bill, both in terms of government procurement, saying if you're manufacturing in the United States, the government will be more likely to buy, and tax incentives for solar, for wind, for other manufacturing in the United States. So that's hopefully going to be part of the Invest Act, the infrastructure bill that we will pass.
The second question is from Ritu, who represents the Indica News. You have been an advocate for promoting manufacturing in the US. And her question is, what percentage of $100 billion, if she's correct, would go in manufacturing and how much in research into AI, et cetera?
Well, I think they're interlinked. I don't think, I mean, again, the breakout isn't, that's for the NSF and DOE and others to decide. But the fundamental view is it will go in towards critical innovation, and those innovations, some of it will be applied that leads to production and manufacturing, some of it will be theoretical, but it'll be much more applied than currently. Currently, there's heavy skew to simply the theoretical, and what this is doing by creating a tech directorate is saying, no, we have to pay attention to the commercialization and practical applications as well, especially given that US tax dollars are paying for it, that they're, one, it's better for science, but two, the American taxpayer deserves some accounting of the value. You can't just have scientists writing in scientific journals for other scientists seeking their own reputation. That's good, but there has to be some focus on what is society gain from this.
The third question is from Sean. Owen visa can support both immigration and innovation. What are the plans to attract top innovators across the globe to US? Canada has overtaken US and North America in the recent years. Any plans to change that landscape? Talking about Owen visas for both immigration and innovation.
Well, I don't believe that Canada is overtaking the US. Can anyone name a successful Canadian company?
They're trying with visas.
Some of this is, is overwrought. I mean, it's a country of 30 million people. Give me a break or something. It's a nice country. It's a polite country. But, you know, and when Canada produces Apple or Google or et cetera, then we can talk. I mean, we're an extraordinary powerhouse. Sometimes we underestimate that. How many people here want to move to Canada? I mean, so a lot of Canadians want to come to the United States. So all of that is to say, look, America is a magnet for people around the world. It still is. Even after Donald Trump, we're still a magnet for people around the world. But what we have to do is, I think, embrace a vision of pluralism, of tolerance and respect, to continue to be that, to invest in our education, to invest in our sense of healthcare, so that we aren't being burdened by healthcare, to make sure that we're supporting a practical education of our population. And if we do all those things, I think we're still an incredibly strong country. I mean, it's true that some of the jobs obviously have gone overseas, and we ought to be competing on that and not be complacent. But we also shouldn't overstate the case.
Yeah, I have a question, right? You talked about the relationship between NSF, and we also talked about DARPA, which is also doing a lot of research grants. And then, of course, Department of Commerce. So how are these three departments connected? And I, for one, is not very clear, because as an entrepreneur, I have received grants from DOE, for example.
Right.
And it was a direct relationship between our company and DOE, and we partnered with University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. But how are these, how is this triangle, right? I mean, it's three different departments.
It's a good point. There probably has to be better federal integration
exactly.
of these scientific communities. And that's something that Eric Lander, who's the head of the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, is working on. How do you have kind of a one-stop coordinated service? But right now, they're pretty distinct. You have NSF that has its own grant process, NIH that has its own grant process, DOE that has its own grant process, the labs that have their own, DARPA that has its own. It's not holistic. Now, some things you don't want holistic, just like you have many different VCs, and that creates a diversity of perspective. But having greater coordination is something that the Biden administration is working on. But right now, it's distinct.
Okay, but each department, the overall money available in this bill, will it go to each of these departments?
It'll go. Yes, the bill specifies how much. So NSF is getting the largest plus up. Some of it's going to the labs, some of it's going to DOE, some of it's going to commerce. It's split. 100 billion is the.
And this is not the DARPA budget. This will not go to DARPA.
DARPA gets funded through a different source, through the Armed Services bill. And DARPA is about 3.5 billion. They'll get some plus up through the through the National Defense Authorization.
Okay.
And this is 100 billion spread over what,
5 years.
5 years.
It's over 5 years. That's
100 billion of new money.
Yeah, new money. And so timing of it, right? I mean, the question that I had is that, Senate has passed it, and then, House has to still work on it. So will it impact this budget year? Because it starts in October, right? Or I don't know if it's too soon to get it.
We're hopeful it'll pass by October, but I think by the end of the year, we're hopeful. Confident it'll pass by the end of the year.
So realistically, for university system and the research community to get money, is that going to be the budget year starting April 1st, or it will be October now or October next year for this money to ultimately impact the market?
I think realistically, it's probably into next year. I mean, I don't know. That'll be a decision that, of course, the administrators will make, how fast they can get it distributed, how much applications it'll be, when they'll be able to set the criteria. But you're probably looking at something in 2022.
That's right. We have a few minutes, and I know there's
a question from Mihir. Yeah, go ahead, Mihir. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Congressman. First of all, congratulations on getting this bill through Senate, which is harder typically.
Typically, yeah.
And I'm really disappointed to see the states which really need this fund to come up.
Yeah.
The one who voted against it for all the political reason, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
But my question is that I have been academic. I've been tenure professor.
Wonderful. Where at?
I was in Florida.
Yeah.
And I still teach at NYU.
Yeah.
Just for the interest in innovation and technology management program. I also been in industry. I lead a global strategy consulting practice as well as head the research and innovation at a law firm.
Wonderful.
Now, what I have found, being in the both side of the table, that there is another group which is in between. And I would directly say that TIE, for example, right? We have a lot of interesting program in TIE, and I'm co-chairing TIE University program where we are looking at how we can get university students to become entrepreneurs.
Right.
How we can create a program for them. Now, universities will get grants, industry will get grants. Is there a grant for TIE?
That's a good question.
Well, it's actually a thoughtful question. I mean, what you're saying is that there's a civic space that has to be looked at, and that it's not just the private sector and the government and the academic, but that how do we cultivate that civic sector as well, that has social capital, that has networks, that influences aspiration and influences mentoring. And I certainly think that there is a role for the civic space. I suppose in this bill, the way that would happen is if a community in, let's say San Jose, of course, would probably not qualify because it's already flourishing, but let's say there was a community that was on the border edge and applied for funding. And they said, as part of this, we want to have some of the funding go to a group like TIE or TIE in that community because they are going to do X, Y, and Z. Then they could get funding as part of the Commerce Grant. It doesn't bar funding of civic nonprofit organizations. More broadly, of course, I support the Congress funding civic organizations and that promote entrepreneurship, and there should be avenues to do that. For the district, we've put funding for several programs, digital programs in the district's infrastructure programs. And if an organization like TIE had a strong program in our district that had the buy-in of a lot of local elected officials and local community leaders, then that could be another avenue for support.
How about TIE connecting with some universities? Is there a way to get funding through that route also?
Yeah, I mean, if the university put for the request for funding, they could say we want to allocate some of that funding for TIE. And that is something that could also be done.
Yeah, on that front also, right? As you know, TIE Silicon Valley is the founding chapter for the overall
Yes.
TIE organization.
How big is it now?
We have 61 chapters around the world.
61.
61 chapters, yes. But there are many chapters within the United States. In fact, TIE Global, which kind of manages all the relationship across all the chapters, we've hired somebody, specifically looking at these kind of grant opportunities and partner with other kind of research innovation ecosystems in a way, right? So is there something that we could work with your offices, or we should go to the respective regions for looking at across America? So the reason I'm saying is that, I mean, we talked about innovation hubs, right? So we have TIE in Boston, Seattle, Portland, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, you name it. There are lots of places TIE offices are there, and each one of them, as you know, is its own 501c6 organization. Right. That's how we've set it up. We are all nonprofit. So the question is, how do we, should we work through your offices, or should we go to the regional elected officials and talk about this opportunity? What should be the guidance?
I would say both. I mean, obviously our office can be helpful in seeing what are the opportunities and what are the potential grants and what are the opportunities through the appropriations process. And then it never hurts. There are 435 members of Congress. The more members of Congress or more senators that are advocating something, the easier it makes it. So certainly I think you should do it regionally, especially if there's a region that's applying to become a technology hub. And TIE can be helpful in that process of helping them think through what that plan should look like to succeed. And in that process can be part of that solution. So I would advocate, I would say both approaches.
Yeah, I see Andy, who's part of our, one of the sponsors, but he's also on our board. How are, I know Silicon Valley Bank is like a big, supporter of TIE also, right? But, is there, like I know in this PPE loan and all, many entrepreneurs work with the bank. Will Department of Commerce engage with any institutions like that for disbursement of any grants and all that stuff? Or
with Silicon Valley Bank?
Or any other banks like that?
I'm sure they would. Obviously, they have to engage with some banks, but I don't know. I mean, that would be a decision for the Secretary of Commerce.
Oh, really?
How, Congress, we appropriate money, we provide guidelines, but then the decisions on administration are appropriately left to the executive branch, because you don't want that to be colored by political interest. So you don't want some member of Congress saying, okay, I know this person at this bank, so work with them. So usually Congress does not prescribe the details, and it's the administration that appoints, in this case, competent people to then come up with the administration of that. So it's not like Congress said to DARPA, we're going to give you billions of dollars, go create the internet. It was that we're going to give you billions of dollars, and then DARPA had the ingenuity to hire Vint Cerf and say, go create the internet.
Yeah.
Any other questions on anybody else? We're almost approaching the tail end of our program right now, but we'll take a couple questions. Go ahead, Sujit.
Yeah.
Anything to help the youth get more into entrepreneurship, to encourage them to get into more entrepreneurship?
It's a great question, and it's been one of the big challenges. When you look at the decline of communities in rural America, one of the biggest negatives has been the decline of entrepreneurship. So rural America actually was flourishing in the 90s, was leading in terms of entrepreneurship, and for some reason you've had decline. Now there are a lot of reasons for that. It could be a lack of access to capital. It could be a lack of appropriate access to technology, a lack of enough networks. But we have to figure out how do we expand entrepreneurship across this country. And I think that TIE can play a big role in that. I think it has to be about dispersion of capital, dispersion of technology, dispersion of opportunity. But other ideas that you have about that would be welcome, because definitely entrepreneurship has to be a critical part of the wealth generation for a community. Otherwise, what you will have is, you could have the 25 million jobs all over the place, but without the entrepreneurship, the wealth would all be sucked up by the places where all the companies and entrepreneurs are. And I don't think that's not what the American people want. They don't want all the wealth just to go to a few places and then they all work for a few regions. They want wealth to be generated locally.
Yeah, go ahead,
What's
Mike.
the next big bill that you're looking at?
Well, first I gotta,
Get it.
Bill Clinton once said that politics is like tennis. If you think about winning the set, you'll lose the point in hand. So we have to first get the bill across the finish line. But we're looking at a number of other bills after this. I'm working with Joe Manchin on a bill to say, how can we make land-grant universities, Ohio State, Michigan State, ones where you had the ag extensions, where these land-grant universities prepare people for the mechanical arts and agriculture. How can we prepare them for the digital economy, to have these universities already partner with the private sector to prepare people for the future? I've thought about a bill on creating a national digital corps, like we have a Peace Corps, like we have people who do different things. What if we had all of these star talents spend 6 months to a year in a community to help them build their digital capacity, which would have the benefit of these communities learning to set up these programs, and would have the benefits for companies to understand other markets better, other communities and cultures better. And then we've had a bill on federal financing bank that would have the federal government provide purchase agreements or loans to set up new factories in electric vehicle manufacturing or big undertakings in communities where new plants are possible.
I think Digital Grant University is a great idea, because there was a Space Grant University also, right?
Yeah.
So land grant, sea grant, those are the old ones, but Space Grant was so I think I would be very interested.
Yeah. So another question, I don't know if it's connected or not. I don't know how much time we have also, right? But let me ask you one other question. There's this category, I think it's called EB5, right, Neha? So EB5 is a kind of category where
Investor visa?
Investor thing. But see, that also ties into creating jobs and developing entrepreneurship or developing entrepreneurs in general, right? Is there any connection, or this is completely disjoint? And that's
well, that's again an immigration issue, and of course we want to encourage foreign direct investment of all kinds. But the immigration, the question of immigration is complex in the narrative, and I'll maybe end with this note on two things. One of my favorite Oscar Wilde quotes is when Oscar Wilde comes to New York and the customs asks him, Mr. Wilde, what do you have of value to declare? And Oscar Wilde says, nothing except my own genius. And so, of course, this is a history of a country that has had people of deep ambition come to the United States and deep excellence, despite their backgrounds, even if they don't have the traditional credentials or the traditional investment capability. But Mario Cuomo was the former governor of New York, has this wonderful passage where he imagines a hypothetical conversation of his parents coming to the United States and talking to the officer at Ellis Island, and the officer saying to his mother, ma'am, what does your husband do? And the mother saying, he's a ditch digger. Does he have a college education? No. Then what do you do? I don't have a job. Do you have a college education? No. Why are you coming to America? Because it's better than where we left. And then do you have kids? Yes, we have a son. What is your hope for that young man? Nothing much, just that he become the governor of New York. And that is the story of the United States at its ideal, that people can come of all different backgrounds, of all different means, but then make something of them in their lives. So when we talk about immigration, we have to understand that powerful undercurrent and not just look at, well, if someone has means or someone has money or someone has degrees, though important, but look at how do we cultivate ultimately a nation with that spirit of ambition, which ultimately is what propels our success.
Yeah, on that note, entrepreneurship is all about ambition. So I guess, thank you for taking the time and supporting, TIE and the initiative. We'll come back to you with respect to how the various chapters within the United States of TIE can work with your offices.
I'm very excited. Well, thank you, AJK, for your leadership, and Yogi for your vision, and to all of you at TIE. I think you're at the cutting edge of supporting a mission critical aspect of the United States, promoting entrepreneurship, promoting it across the nation, helping us lead technologically. So it's a very, very important organization, and I'm very proud that its genesis was here in our district, and I look forward to working for many years with all of you.
Yeah, and thank you all. Thank you, audience. Bye.